Welcome to Attainable Green. I'm Jess, and today we're going to be talking about how to take care of the Dendrobium nobile and the related hybrids. This is going to be a carecollab video with several other orchid channels. It's Danny's Orchid Journey, Svetlana Orchid Passions in Deutschland, What's Up Orchids, Honeybees and Orchids, Fernanda Nascimento Orchids and Succulents, Tropical Orchids Finland, Ed's Orchids, and Ninja Orchids. We're going to share how we take care of this plant in our various climates and setups, and hopefully this will be a nice well-rounded care guide so that if one person's setup or climate may be different than yours, you may find one that is more similar and it'll be more beneficial to you. The more people who talk about how they take care of these plants, the fuller picture you get of how these plants grow and their behaviors. So let's dive right in. The Dendrobium nobile I have is the China Dream Crystal. This is a very special plant because it's one of the few that are actually patented. So this plant has been patented in Japan, and so its parents are actually kept secret. All I know is that it does have nobile in its background, and this is considered a keiki division of the original plant. The flowers on this plant are very unique because of the reverse picotee on it, and that basically means that there is a white edging on the petals and sepals, and then the color pink is in the center. Usually for these plants, the coloring is on the edges of the leaves, and then the center is more white. So to have it kind of in reverse makes it very special. I'm going to go over the basic growth cycle of the Dendrobium nobile just to give you an idea of how this plant grows. First, when the plant is starting new growth, it just emerges usually from the base. Sometimes it can emerge from the middle of the cane, but that's usually because it's a keiki. So when the new growth emerges, it will grow very fast, and that's when you start applying water and fertilizer to help it maintain its momentum. You want to allow the cane to grow as big and fleshy as possible so that it will have a great bloom cycle. Usually when the cane is fully mature, you will notice that the last leaf kind of ends straight out instead of growing to the side, and that's how you know that the cane has finished growing at its full length. Afterwards, the cane will start to get fatter, and that's how it stores as much nutrients it can for the winter season. As the temperatures start to cool off during the winter time, that's when you back off watering, back off the fertilizer, and you slowly let it dry out longer and longer between waterings. During this time, I just water it less frequently. In the winter, maybe about once every 2 weeks, and it can go all the way up to once a month. Depending on the temperature, the leaves may completely fall off, or sometimes it will retain some of its leaves. Eventually, the older canes will become completely leafless. When new growth starts, then the leaves will come back. So during winter, I call it more of a drier in winter kind of thing instead of a winter's rest. I think this plant needs a little bit more light in the winter time since it doesn't have as many leaves, and then it'll initiate its blooming when the cooler weather hits. At this point in time, you may see small nubbins along the length of the cane on the opposite side of where the leaf appears. At those nodes, that is where the flowers emerge, and there can be anywhere from 1 bud up to 6 or more buds per node. So that can create quite a floriferous display when the plants are in bloom. Also, older canes can bloom too, so it'll just be at nodes where they haven't bloomed before. That's where new buds may form. If a node already has bloomed previously, it doesn't tend to bloom again. So over time, if you have a larger plant, you can have quite the display because different nodes and different canes will be in full flower. And when the entire length of the cane is in flower, it is very stunning. So that is what makes the Dendrobium nobile hybrids such a fantastic plant to have. So when it comes to care, I like to keep it pretty simple. I grow this plant on a 2nd-story balcony that gets afternoon light. So it gets about 8 to 10 hours of sunlight, and the rest of the time it's considered bright shade. During the growing season, primarily spring to fall, it actually gets some direct light onto this plant, but not enough that it will cause it to burn. And since it's outdoors all the time, it is slowly acclimated to the strength and intensity of the light so that I don't have any sunburn issues. When it comes to temperature, it can handle anywhere from 40 degrees Fahrenheit up to 100 degrees. And that just depends on the time of year and how much you're watering. So during the hotter days of the year, I keep this plant well watered to just maintain its hydration. And then during the winter season, I back off on the waterings and keep it drier when it's cold. On the canes, you can tell when it needs water because sometimes it'll start to shrivel and wrinkle a little bit, and then once it's well hydrated, it'll plump right back up. Of course, the older the cane is, it may just continue to stay wrinkled, and that's completely normal. Over time, those canes may start to slowly desiccate until they're done, and then you can just remove them. As for humidity, I have about 40 to 60% humidity outdoors, and during the Santa Ana wind events, which basically are very hot, dry winds that come through several times a year, the humidity can dip to about 10% or lower. And then during those times, I just try to keep it well watered and shaded, just so that the plant stays healthy. I haven't repotted this plant yet, so I can't give advice about that, but currently this one is potted in sphagnum moss, and the moss itself has been completely eaten up by all the roots, so I don't think that there's much left by way of media in this pot. So after this plant blooms, I am definitely going to repot it. As for my other dendrobiums, I've had great success putting it in some medium bark and perlite, and that seems to do well. I add a little bit of rocks on the bottom of the pot for my dendrobiums because they tend to be a little bit top heavy. So by making sure that there's a little bit of weight towards the base of the plant will just help it do much better. When it comes to fertilizer, I use slow release NutriCoat at about half strength. So that seems to be sufficient for growing these plants, although I can probably push it again this year by increasing the amount and see how it goes. So far I haven't had any problems with that, and it seems to do well during the growing season. When it comes to this particular dendrobium, I have pest issues, but when it comes to my other dendrobiums, I have more of disease issues. So when it comes to diseases, it usually gets kind of a base rot or a root rot. And that usually happens in the summertime where it gets too hot, too dry, and the plants just don't do well in those conditions. If it's too hot and dry, it doesn't have enough hydration, then the new growth can easily get stunted, or it can just start to rot and fail. This tends to happen more on my species orchids than on my hybrids, but I just noticed in general that that's what seems to happen. When it comes to pests, it's usually like a snail, slug, or some sort of chewing insect that attacks my dendrobiums, and they attack all parts of this plant, which is very unfortunate. Sometimes they chew on the root system, and then the plant itself just cannot sustain itself because it has no roots. And other times I notice that they just start chewing on the leaves as they emerge, and in that way, the plant can't support itself because it can't photosynthesize because it doesn't have enough leaves. And the third issue is it can attack the flowers or chew on the buds, and then you either have holes in your flowers or just missing buds altogether. So for this particular plant, I really had a problem with the pest chewing on the buds. As you can see for this one cane, it's missing about half of the flowers on this plant, which is very unfortunate because otherwise it would have been such a good display. I thought it wasn't a huge issue at first because it was just, one little node that was missing, but then slowly it just started to grow and grow, and then I had to take this plant indoors, inspect it, and remove these pests. I know that once these plants are starting to spike, I will have to move them indoors to protect them from the pests so that I could have a nice display to share. So that is how I take care of the Dendrobium nobile hybrid. If you grow this plant and you have some tips on tricks, please let me know in the comments, and please check out all the other YouTubers on their videos to see how they grow this Dendrobium nobile. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this, please click on the playlist, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!